All right, welcome back again to the JFK Assassination Audit. This is video number 51 on 25 January. We're just going to keep doing what I've got into this pattern doing here. We're going to keep going down the timeline, reading the statements, making comment, making observations, and looking for those little diamonds in this big warehouse aircraft carrier, not aircraft carrier, but aircraft hangar of shit called the Warren Commission volumes. Anyway, it says, look at the map. Here is the parking lot. Okay, we think we went over that part about the parking lot there. And see how the questioning of Mr. Ball, okay, this is an old attorney's technique, is what you do is you start off questioning them about little things, and then you try to confuse them and you wear them down, okay? And so then by the time you get to the actual point where you're trying to make and the actual meat of the testimony, you've worn them down where you're going to see where Frazier just basically gets to agreeing with him. Yes, no, yes, okay, I guess, things like that. It's just a pretty well known means of controlling a witness, okay? Because you wear them down with just mundane things. You see them do it all through the testimony. I tried to figure out in the beginning, why were they talking about bullshit that had really nothing to do with, did you see Oswald? Was he carrying a rifle? What was he wearing? You know, did you see him any other time after that? They don't do that. And when they do get into those things, they jump around to confuse the witness. But anyway, we'll keep going. All right, so he's talking about Houston Street, all these kinds of things. And let's see. And enter the rear of the building. Yes, sir. I'm going to try to get to this as fast as possible. Now we call it loading zone out there, dock area. Fine. Did anyone else ride with you in the morning? Usually, did anyone else ride with you in the morning from home to work? No, sir, they didn't. Did anybody ride with you from work to home? See how he asked the same thing again? No, sir, they didn't. When did you first hear of Lee Harvey Oswald? First hear his name. I first heard, I never really did know his name. We just called him Lee around here. But the first time I ever saw him was the first day he came to work. Had you heard he was coming to work before he came to work? I will say, talking back and forth with the boss man all the time, and from being around and getting along real fine, and so he told me, I assumed the day after he hired him that he was going to have him come in on Monday and ask me if I ever had seen him, and I told him no, I had never seen him. All right. Had your sister told you the fellow Lee was coming to work? Yes, she did. She said one afternoon when I went home, she told me she found out from one of the neighbors there that he came over for the interview with Mr. Truly, and Mr. Truly hired him. You heard from your sister? Yes. Before you saw him? Right. Before I saw him. When you first saw him, was it Monday morning? Yes, it was. Do you have any idea of the date itself? Do you have any memory of the date when you first saw him? No, sir, I don't. Was it sometime around the middle of October? Do you think would be close to it? It could have been because it was sometime in October, because I remember I went to work on the 13th and I had been working there 4 or 5 weeks. Then he come there. Where was he when you first saw him? I first saw him. We have a table not as large as this. Excuse me, I have to get my pointer here because I'm losing track. But just about half as large as this, and we have, just like you walk up to where I am sitting over here, and we have 4 or 5 boxes there, and we have different names on it, for different publishing companies. And he was getting some orders, and I say, as well as I remember, I said the foreman there was getting him out some really easy orders. Some of the orders are really easy to fill, easier than others. You don't have to know so much about the textbooks to be able to fill them. And he was getting some of these ones to start on when we have a great number of them, you see, a little pamphlet type books, and all we do is count them out and read the invoice number. What was the name of the foreman showing him? You mean the foreman? That was Mr. Shelley. Shelley, Shelley. What floor was this on? It was on the first floor. Did Shelley introduce you to him, or did he go up and shake hands with him? No, sir, he didn't. I remember I knew, that he was going to be coming to work, so naturally I hadn't been there very long, living in Dallas, and so I wanted to make friends with everybody I could because, yourself, friendship is something you can't buy with money. You always need friends. So I went up and introduced and told him his name was Lee, and I said, "We are glad to have you." We got talking back and forth, and to come find out, I knew his wife was staying there at the time with the other woman, and so I thought he could go out there and said, "Are you going to be going home this afternoon?" And he told me he didn't have a car, and so I told him, "Well, I live out there in Irving." I found out he lived out there I found out he lived out there, and so I said, "Anytime you want to go, just let me know." That's odd because Oswald doesn't live out there. Anyway, he probably doesn't know that at the time. So I thought he would go home every day like most men do, but he told me no, that he wouldn't go home every day. And then he asked me, could he ride home, say like Friday afternoon on weekends and come back on Monday morning, and I told him that would be just fine. I told him if he wanted to ride any other time, just let me know before I go off and leave, because when it comes to quitting time, some of these guys, some of them mess around the bathroom, and some of them quit early, and some of them like that, and some leave at different times than others. But I said, with talking to him, I say he just wanted to ride home on weekends with me, and I said that was fine. So eventually we're going to come across this, but we're going to jump ahead. I've heard from testimony of other workers there that actually Oswald rode back and forth more than just on Friday evenings and Monday mornings. It was sometimes almost every day, from what I understand. Because it wouldn't take that much to go from Irving over to where Oswald was living on Beckley and then straight across into town. Did he say at that time he was living in Dallas, he had a room in Dallas? Yes, sir. He said he had an apartment. Did he say where? No, sir. He didn't. He just said he had an apartment over in Dallas. Had you known his wife before that? Had you ever met his wife, Marina Oswald? No, sir, I never had. Have you heard that a Russian girl was staying there in the neighborhood? Well, I say about this time I met him, I knew that at the time then, but I didn't think anything about it because, the people travel from one country to the next all the time. So I find that an odd statement because here we got this guy from Huntsville, Texas, probably never been out of Texas. Okay, he talks about how, wild it was going to Washington, D.C. to do this testimony, and the first time flying a plane. But here he's got a guy, his coworker that he's riding with, who lived in Texas, was in the Marines, who lived in Japan, who lived in California, who went through Germany, went through France, was raised in New Orleans, all these different things. And all they talk about is babies and the weather, supposedly. So I do find that quite odd. Did you know Mrs. Payne, Ruth Payne? No, sir. I didn't until all this happened because I will be frank with you, people around there, I say they just don't make friends very easy. I say you can have somebody living 3 doors from you, and you can live a couple of years, and you still might not know the name. And you had never met Mrs. Ruth Payne before the day you met Lee Oswald? No. What kind of work did Lee do? What kind of work was he assigned to him? He filled orders, like I do, and several other men. How many order fillers were employed at that time? Oh, I would say roughly around 5 or 6 at that time. Because about that time, we were real busy, the busy season. I come there, and they were pretty good And when I went to work, I saw they were still pretty good. And when he come to work there, we had a lot of work to do. And usually we had a lot of work to do. We have order fillers. All right. Did he ride home with you in your car on the weekdays or weekends? Yes, sir, he did. On Friday nights? Right. From that time until November 22nd, did he ride home with you every weekend? No, sir. He did every weekend but one. Do you remember that date? No, sir, I don't. I believe it was the weekend before. In the statement you made, I believe it was the weekend before because he had to go take a driver's test, I believe, the previous Friday. And he went with Mrs. Payne to take the driver's test, and when they got there, it was closed. Anyway, in the statement you made, I said, in the statement you made, I believe you said it was the 16th and the 17th. And I'm just reminding you of that. Does it refresh your memory any? Hold on one second. Let me just double check something. All right, so the 16th would have been a Monday. The 17th would have been a Tuesday. Anyway, I remember one weekend I say, I right now can't recall, but because just to be frank with you, I couldn't tell you roughly. I say I might, God, it slipped away my mind, but the things I do know, he rode with me every weekend up to that but one. And why did he tell you why he wasn't going to ride home that weekend? See, that's really weird because that would have been a Monday. Anyway, yes, he did. He said he was working on his driving test and he was going to go take a driving test. Did you ever ask him afterward if he had taken his driving test? Now, I want to find out in Mrs. Payne's statements, was she teaching him to drive? Was she letting him use the car to take the driving test? I wonder if that was the situation there. No, sir, I never did. I assumed that he had taken it and passed it, what part of the test he was taking. Most men do, I say. They usually work at it, study it is good enough so they don't flunk out. Do you have to get a learner's permit in Texas before you can get a driver's permit? No, sir, I say, you don't. Just 2 steps to it. I say, first, no matter what age you are, say when you have to be at least 14 is about the youngest you can get it in Texas, and you have to take the DE, driver's education, if you're going to school, but otherwise the age is 16, and you must go around to the driver's license bureau, and they have an office in most any town in any size in Texas. You just go in and drive and see the driver's license man and tell him that you plan to take your driving test and you would like to have an auto manual, and the manual covers any laws and so forth in the state of Texas, and you can either study for your operators or your commercial, and you pick up which one you want and you study up for it, and he is there. He tells you what days he is in the office, and so he goes there a certain time and gives you several sheets of quiz, and you answer them questions, and if you have to make a grade of 70 on it to pass, and if you make a grade of 70 or above, well, I say in another week or two you go down there and you say, like, for instance, if you're going to want a driver's license for a car, and then Mr. Ford, then Representative Ford pours gasoline all over his body and sets himself on fire while listening to Wesley Frazier's boring testimony. Anyway, did Lee ever ask you, or did Lee ever tell you whether he had ever actually applied for a driver's license? Frazier, no, sir. He never had, except I told you that the weekend that he said he was going to go down to take his driver's test, and so knew from being in the state of Texas that you were have to know something. You have to have the manuals and so forth to study up on it, or there isn't any use of going down there if you don't know the rules, because you are wasting the time. You're not wasting any time but your own. Do you remember whether or not one weekend that he didn't go with you, but he rode back with you on the Armistice Day holiday? Do you remember? No, sir, I don't. All right. Your memory is that he rode with you home every Friday, and came back the following Monday. Yes, except this one weekend. Right. That is what I say. If he went home with me on Friday afternoon, it's always rode back with me on Monday morning. It wasn't no added job when he would come with me on the weekend. He would ride home with me on Friday, and he would come back with me on Monday. Did he ever tell you that he had or had not applied for a driver's license? No, he had not, except he told me he was going down to take it. He never told you that he had or had not? No. And he never told you whether he had obtained a driver's license? No, sir. So apparently, I guess Oswald was going down to take the quiz part, and then he would come back later and take the driving part. Did you ever talk to him on whether or not he could drive a car, knew how to drive a car? Well, I believe the first afternoon, the first time we come home, and we were talking about that, he said he was working on his driver's license then, and then naturally I told you several weeks later, then he told me he was going to take his driving test, and I assumed he could drive a car, being as old as he was, because most everybody in the state of Texas, by the time you are my age, and if you can't drive a car, something is wrong with you. Now, I seem to remember there's testimony that Oswald was driving a Jeep in Japan and Okinawa. I also seem, but you don't really need a state driver's license to do that. I believe the military has their own licensing. Yeah, they do, because I do remember, because I had to take a military driving course to drive. It was called an S10 Blazer, and you have to have already a driver's license from some state, and then you took their course, and then the military, yeah, I do remember, it was a piece of paper they gave us with a photo on it, that they give you a military driver's license. So Oswald could have had a military driver's license, already know how to drive a Jeep or a truck or something, because Oswald was doing a lot of casual duty, because when he got court-martialed, I believe they took his clearances away, and so you can't do that. Then you're doing clerical duty and washing trucks and things like casual duty. Okay. Also, there's testimony of this barber in Clinton, Louisiana, that said Oswald drove up in a car with a pregnant lady about September, and was driving, or at least he didn't see him drive up. He saw the car drive up. Oswald came in, and then he saw Oswald get in the car and drive off. That was one. Another one there, and then of course there's the Bolton Ford, where the guy said he was Oswald test driving, speeding down around the highways there. And then the people over at the Sportsman shooting range said they're seeing Oswald drive up to the range, sometimes drive up with a guy named Frazier also. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so... okay, and we keep going. Meanwhile, again, Mr. Ford is over in the corner trying to light those matches to set himself on fire while Frazier is stalking. You remember any conversation when you ask him what the clutch was? Okay, they're talking about parts of the car. Oh, yes, we got talking about that. He noticed, that most cars as old as mine, most of them are standard shift. And when I brought this old car, it kind of fooled me. It had automatic transmission, so it was... So so we got talking about it on the way home, driving home. Aha! So he did talk about more than just babies and the weather. And I told him it was really standard, prefer standard because, they are a lot easier to work on. And, when an automatic goes dead, it goes dead. There's no rolling a couple of feet and jumping on the clutch and starting when the battery is down. And I remember he said it was a little bit different to drive with a clutch. I said if you're not used to it, but if you get used to it, you have to find a friction point on the car. Even on a Chevrolet or Ford, yourself, the friction point on the car, and the brakes are different, adjusted on every car you drive. All right. And I told you there was nothing to do. And I told you there is nothing you do. You must have to get used to a car, the individual. You can drive one car to do it, and then you can drive another one. It may take a couple of days to get used to it. I'm sorry, the reason I'm reading like this because it's hard to read for me because I'm not used to this ignorant way of speaking. But anyway, so I'm just reading basically one word at a time instead of flowing through it. Mr. Ball, he is the only one who mentioned the clutch, is he? That you didn't have a clutch. Right. I guess he noticed that I didn't have a clutch. I see. Did he pay for any part of the trip? Buy you gasoline? No, sir, he didn't. I never asked him because, like I said, I drove over there anyway, and it doesn't take any more to drive one guy than it does to drive a carload. Did he offer to pay at any time? No, sir, he didn't. At any time coming back after the weekend? Did he ever stop at a restaurant for breakfast? No, sir, we never did. Did he ever stop on the way home on Friday night and buy anything? No, sir. Stopped one time and bought some gas, I remember. Did he pay for it? No, sir, he didn't. Did he offer to? No, sir, he didn't. Did you ever see him have any money in his possessions, bills, change? No, sir. I never did see him out playing around with any money. All right. On the way back and forth, did you talk very much to each other? Oh, God, here we go. No, sir, not very much. Lie is? What is that? I'm not sure. Lie is. Probably in your line of business, you probably have seen a lot of guys who talk a lot, and some don't, and he was one of these types that just didn't talk. And I have seen, I am not very old, but I have seen a lot of guys in my time just going to school, different boys and girls. Some talk a lot and some don't. So I didn't think anything strange about that. About the only time you could get anything out of him was about babies. Babies. He had one and he was expecting another. That was one way he had to get the job because his wife was pregnant, and I would always get something out of it when I asked him about the babies, because it seemed he was very fond of children, because when I asked him, he chuckled and told me about what he was doing about the babies over the weekend, and sometimes we would talk about the weather, and sometimes he would go to work and it would be cloudy in the morning, and it would come out afternoon after work. Sometimes during that day it would turn out to be just fine. The prettiest days you would want anywhere, and he would just say some comment about that, but not very much. Now, he would say a few words and then he would cut off. Did he ever tell you he had been to Russia, say anything about that? Well, I say we were talking about one time talking about the service, and so I asked him, and he said he'd been overseas, and said that he said he had, and asked him if he had ever been to Germany, and he said he had been through there. So most times when the boys are in the service in the United States, they either go to Japan, or I say they go over there and go to some of these, say like Germany or France, somewhere like that. All right. And so other than that, he told me he had been through there. Did he say he had ever been to Russia? All right. He said, like I say, he said he had been over there, and he said he had been there. So I thought, when he told me, yes, he said, so I thought maybe, being I know, he told me, God almighty, he had been in the service, and I thought maybe that is how he got in. In other words, your answer is yes. He did tell you he had been in the service, right? Did he go into detail and tell you how he got there and what he did there? No, he didn't. To be frank with you, I was more interested about France and Germany, and I asked him about them towns, and he told me he liked France. I mean, he said he didn't like France. He said the people in France are more of a kind to con the United States boys out of their money, and he was in Germany there for 2-3 days, and he said he liked Germany better than France because that is one reason. because he said if you didn't really know how to count French money, then the French guys would really take you. Anyway, so he gets into all this conversation about France, and he was only in France a couple of days, but absolutely nothing about Russia, nothing about Japan. Doesn't make much sense. Anyway, we'll keep going. Did he say anything about being in the Marines? Yes, he told me he was in the Marines. That he had been to Japan? No, sir, he didn't say he had been to Japan. Ever talk to you about politics? No, sir, he didn't. Ever mention any subjects like political parties, the Democrats, Republicans? No, sir, he didn't. Ever mention anything about communists, Marxists, or any words like that did he use? No, sir. All right. So what we have here is Oswald, who's definitely a little more educated than Frazier. And you can see by Frazier's speaking that Frazier's not the sharpest person around, okay? And if you think about it, if you're on an assignment, you're working as an informant for the FBI or whoever, and they've told you to go to this place and keep an eye out on everybody, okay, you're not going to be talking a lot. You're going to be watching, okay? So he's obviously not going to open up that much about him being a communist or him being in Russia and all these things, okay? And again, you got to think about the mentality of people back then at that time, okay? In reality, if people found out that Oswald was a Marxist or a communist and had been in Russia and was a traitor to the United States, do you think in conservative, ultra-conservative Dallas that they would have associated with him at work? You know, would they let their kids go over to Mrs. Payne's house and play with him and his kids? I mean, people were shunned and blacklisted in Hollywood, okay, just for being in some socialist club back in college 20 years before, okay? So now we have this strange situation where this communist, and nobody seems to really care that he defected to Russia or even know about it, okay? Again, this is why I believe he did his pamphleting in New Orleans, because if he had come back to Dallas and he had been doing this, or he'd come back to Dallas and was doing his pamphleting on the streets in Dallas, no one would have given him a job. They would have thrown his ass out onto the street, like I was saying before. Nobody would have acted the way they're acting here. So this is why they took him from Dallas, okay, to put him in New Orleans. You know, put it on the record in New Orleans, and then they could bring him back to Dallas, and not too many people are going to know that much about him or that much about it. Okay. All right. We'll keep going here. Let's see. Did he tell you where he met his wife? No, sir, he didn't. Did he ever talk about his wife? No, sir, he didn't. I say, like I said, he was just a guy who didn't talk very much at all. At the Texas School Book Depository, you have a lunch 45 lunch hour, don't you, right? Did you pack your lunch from home? Yes, sir, I always took my lunch. Do you remember whether or not Oswald came back with you on any Monday or any weekend? Did he pack his lunch? Yes, sir, he did. He did? Yes, sir. When he rode with me, I say he always brought lunch except the one day, November 22nd, he didn't bring his lunch that day. But every other day, he brought his lunch, right, when he rode with me. Would he bring in a paper sack or some kind of container? Yes. Like a paper sack you get in the grocery store. You have seen these little old sacks that you could buy, sandwich bag sacks. Did he ever carry, did you ever carry your lunch in a paper sack? Yes, sir, I did. There's a lunchroom in the Texas School Book Depository. Yes, sir. Is that on the first floor? No, sir, on the second floor. There was some kind of recreation area from the first floor. There's a little domino room there. Would some of the guys go in and play dominoes? But the lunchroom is on the second floor. Right. Do they sell any food there? No, sir. Now, again, this is Dallas. It's segregated, so most of the Negroes and Oswald are going to be eating in that domino room. And most of the white people and the more educated people from the other offices are going to be eating on the second floor. And they may go up to the second floor and get a Coke, but most of them are going to come back down to the what do you call it? The domino room there. All right, so we're going to stop here, and we're going to keep going on this track here. And this is just very, very boring. Like I said, we're down there with our little rake and our little spade, and we're sifting through all this shit, okay? And we're looking for diamonds. And we're going to find diamonds. You just have to really be patient. All right, hold on one second. All right, we're back on the Des Moines Shield Altman's interview.
Whys and wherefores, and did not ask any more questions about this colonel. Now it is too late to find out. Maybe this colonel, for his own personal reasons, helped his niece to get out of Russia. Possibly it was good riddance, possibly something else. Here I would like to add that the local émigrés liked Marina because she came, supposedly, from a family of pre-revolutionary officers. In other words, she came from a family of ex-Tsarist officials. This was, of course, completely indifferent to us, and we did not inquire about this matter.
Judge, talk a little bit in the microphone. You start being tired, and you talk clearly, please.
So it was rather puzzling to us that Marina was obtained the permission to leave Soviet Union
so easily.
You
feel her uncle might have helped.
Maybe uncle helped, but on the other hand, we have heard of other cases of Americans marrying Russian girls and getting them out of Soviet Union, and we thought also that the situation has improved in Soviet Union, and that now you can take a woman out of there. One day my wife asked Lee a straightforward question. Tell me, Lee, why did you decide to go to Russia and risk never to return to your country? In other words, to the United States. And Lee said, because I was looking for an ideal. And why did you decide to return? My wife insisted. Because I did not find my ideal. Utopias do not exist. He answered immediately. This is a very good answer, and I think we appreciated it. I remember that when this question was asked, my wife went and was in the process of preparing a good Russian meal for them. I kept on talking with Lee, sometimes late into evenings. What I liked about his conversation was that he never was hostile or emotional about his experiences in Russia. He spoke fondly of the Russian co-workers. They were hospitable, friendly, sincere. They invited me to their homes. We discussed all the subjects frankly. Nobody tried to intimidate me or to brainwash me. Nobody tried to make a communist out of me, and I never became a member of the Communist Party. Of that, he was very insistent, and I had no reason to disbelieve him. And how were the working conditions there, I would ask him. Not bad at all. 8 hours a day, not too strenuous, clean, nice factory, good companionship. And the pay, I insisted, sufficient. The apartment cost me about 5% of my pay, and you know I don't eat much. I had money to spare. When we married, Marina had a salary also. We could manage quite well. And the clothes, I asked. Well, my tastes are simple. I could afford to buy necessary clothes. Of course, I didn't have a motorcycle or even a bicycle, but I liked to walk. Then transportation by bus was very inexpensive and good in Minsk. What was really annoying to you, if anything, in Soviet Russia? Asked Jean. Those endless meetings we had to attend after work, said Lee emphatically, and listening to those deadly speeches. You were lucky if you were in a back room and could take a nap from time to time. All the workers, except the dedicated party members, loathed these meetings.
And what else did he say about them? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, he said, as I remember, that we listened to monotonous speeches, half-dazed, like children, at the end of the long, boring lesson. Then we voted, rather indifferently, as if still in a daze. Then later, like children, we would file from that room. Like children, we filed from the school, and we ran home happily. And, added Lee, for those meetings, for the lost hours we spent there, we were never paid any extra pay. We never had any extra pay. Listening to that, I thought to myself, this fellow is all right. He spoke of other foreigners who lived or worked in Minsk. I do not recall their names. Quite a few were from South America. One family was from Argentina. The old man was a television engineer, and Lee was very fond of him and his daughters. Lee spoke quite frequently of them, emphasizing the fact that they had such pretty daughters. All in all, Lee spoke frequently of his interest in women. He even bragged a little about his conquests. And
I wanted to say something about, I was just thinking what Lee was talking about. We were talking about what Lee was saying, and about real politic, about the way reality is in the real world of politics, okay? So this is how it is, whether it's a communist country or this capitalist democratic country. This is the reality, how things are, okay? So you have on the bottom here, okay, you've got people like you and me, the vast majority, 90-something% of people in every country, all working, trying to pay the bills, trying to raise their kids, not really ideological fanatics or anything like that, okay? They may have their own opinions and things, but mostly, you know, if there's push and shove between paying the bills and getting the kids braces and voting for some candidate, you know, the practical things always are moved to the forefront, okay? Always. Getting the kids braces, paying the bills, paying the rent, paying the mortgage, things like that. Then you've got, I don't know what to call them. They're not always rich, but you got the fanatics, okay? And they lie somewhere between the working class, just people trying to make it in the world, and the rich people and the politicians, okay? We've seen a lot of these fanatics come about in the last 5 years, 6 years with Trump. They're powerless. They actually gain a little power, you know, like going on YouTube, social media, and it makes them feel important. But they're fanatics, okay? Whether on the left, whether on the right, they're fanatics. A lot of them don't have any family, don't have any cares, no responsibilities, and they're fanatics. The crazies, the crazy uncle, you know, everybody's seen them, everybody knows them. Oh God, I didn't know that guy was going to be at the party, the Christmas party, the office party, whatever. Everybody has to endure them and they can't stand them. It's hard to get away from them sometimes. Everybody knows these people, types of people, okay? And it's that way in the capitalist, democratic world. And you have the same types of people who aspire to be the political ideologues in these factories. Everybody hates them. Nobody socializes with them. But they've gained a little bit of power, and now they're fanatics. And then above them, you've got the rich people, or the well-to-do people, the well-off people. If they lost a paycheck, it's not going to sink them, okay? And those are the people that have power. They're not out in the front. They're not on Tucker Carlson, you know. And I'm talking about like the doctors, the lawyers, the business owners, people like that. They're not the ultra-rich like Elon Musk and, you know, Bill Gates, but they're well off. And those are the ones that you see supporting their political people. They're looking for a candidate that can support their ideals and things like that. And then you've got the then in between that, you've got the politicians who are always out there, you know. They're always looking for handouts. They're always looking for the latest fad. You know, you've got this person, what's her name? Carrie Lake, who's gone from the news media to the politicians, and now she says you can't trust the news media. And they're always trying to ride this wave of where their political support they think's at. And their word isn't worth shit. They go wherever, you know, they stick their finger up, they lick their finger and stick it up, and their politics is whatever the wind is at, especially if that wind is blowing money. Okay, and then you've got the ultra-rich, the Bill Gates, and all those people, and those are like the forefront. You even have people that actually own more than Bill Gates and the public face of people, and those are the people that are behind the closed doors and the limousines and Davos and all those things. They're just a super rich, and they rarely ever want to put their public face out there, and they let other idiots do that for them. Okay, so that's the way it is in our world, and even in the communist world, it's like that. Okay, there's people that are in power there that seek power and exercise that power. But what he's talking about are fanatics, people that are just out there, you know, screaming, howling at the wind, and making everyone else endure them. We've got fanatics in the Trump world, in the MAGA world, the conspiracy world. They're all over there. Everyone hates them. No one likes them. But a lot of times, the politicians, if they scream loud enough, the politicians can't ignore them. So that's why you see this extreme shift in the Republican Party to the right, the conspiracy world, the QAnon world. Okay, so this is what Oswald's talking about. This is the kind of, these statements are the kinds that make me think that either Oswald had a duality about his personality, or he really did believe these things and was looking for his utopia, which he couldn't find in Russia, and that's why he came back. But why come back to Dallas? It's even worse. Why not go to New York, California? You know, I don't know. I'm still confused about where Oswald is at, but he does things that make him seem like an FBI, some kind of government informant, and then he does other things and makes other statements that, you know, I don't know. Either way, whether he was this utopian-seeking ideologue socialist, he wasn't a communist, or he was this patriotic soldier working for the government, or thinking he was working for the government, he was used by this rogue element of the government and the Cubans and these mercenaries in the right wing and set up. Anyway, we'll keep going.
I'm sure he cut quite a path among the female population of Minsk. And why not? He was a dashing foreigner, an American. He looked and dressed differently, and above all, he was friendly, and his interest in Russian people was genuine. And this is also, I recall Marina told us, that why did you like Lee, would ask him. Well, he looked differently, he was an American, and it was something out of the ordinary. He was not like the other guys. Quite frequently.
And I made this point before, I'm just going to keep emphasizing it, that, we've got this different Oswald in Russia. Okay? He's outgoing, friendly, goes to parties, everybody likes him. He doesn't hold back, he says what he believes. But then you've got this Oswald in Texas that doesn't have any friends, doesn't talk to many people. I want to read some more about people that worked with him at Jaeger, Childs, and these other companies. I'm sure I'm going to come across people like that, but I haven't yet. But we have these two different Oswalds, which I don't quite understand yet.
Marina would say that Lee was a perfectly normal individual.
See?
Except that he was more interested in politics and book than in sex.
Again, it may be that Oswald was perfectly normal in his sexual habits, but Marina, because of her go-getter type of personality and using the only power that she had, which was her sex, therefore that's why the KGB used her as an asset to, pillow talk and to turn these other foreigners that she was working on in that Marina project. So maybe her interests were more sexual than were normal. Okay? So you might want to think about it like that.
Well, this I think is
No,
yeah. Could we stop now, because I cannot, I got lost.
Alright, it's going to pick it back up in a second.
Yeah, George, go ahead.
So we said that Marina mentioned that Lee was more interested in politics than in sex. It's rather confidential, but I think my wife remembers that Marina would tell her that Lee slept with her just once a month, and I never get any satisfaction out of it.
You can say it, we can cross it out later
Yeah.
at the advice of the publisher. Talk in the matter.
Now we're talking, well, again, some reminiscences about Marina and Lee's life in Soviet Russia. We had the impression that Marina wanted a richer life, and that she convinced Lee to leave USSR,
See, there you go.
and that she made him go to the embassy and ask for his passport.
See? So again, you want to think about that in terms of a KGB asset. They're going to be, they can't use Oswald, so they're going to be pushing for her to get him to leave, to go back to the U.S., okay, because they've gotten whatever they're going to get out of him. And then they're going to have her reporting back to them. Also, another thing, we're going to come across this later on, she doesn't have to just write to Ant KGB directly to the USSR. She can also do dead drops. She may have a contact in Dallas that she's been told about, okay, never has to meet with them. she can say to Mrs. Payne, hey, I'm going to go to the store, and they can have a prearranged meeting somewhere, or they could have a dead drop area. You know, there's plenty of parks and plenty of cemeteries around there that she could leave a message, a secret message in a container somewhere, and then that person could, come by and pick it up, pass it on to the Russian consulate or embassy somewhere. You could have someone that didn't have to be a Russian agent in Dallas, that just like Mrs. Payne is passing on information to the FBI. The Russians would have someone sympathetic to them that would go by, pick up the messages, pass it, mail it to the Soviet embassy, mail it to a warehouse contact or something that would forward it on to Russia. You could have contacts in the United States that are Americans with American addresses, that mail could go back and forth that no one would suspect, okay? And then they could pass that or leave that information for someone in the embassy to pick up, to put in the diplomatic pouch, to send back every week. There's many ways of communication here, okay? And if it goes that way to Russia, it can go that way back to Marina. Again, all the indications that I'm seeing about Marina is that she was a sexual entrapment asset of the KGB. I mean, there's no way around that. There's no way she would be able to leave Russia, okay, unless that's one of the things that she was doing, was sending back information. Anyway.
And as I recall, she told us that Lee took illegally a train from Minsk to Moscow. As being a foreigner, he was not supposed to leave town without notifying the police. And that's how he obtained finally the permit to return to the United States, and also the permit for Marina to leave.
And I mean, do you really think that Oswald, they wouldn't have noticed that he was leaving Minsk and showed up at the embassy in Moscow? To really believe that they weren't aware of that is, ridiculous. And also, since Marina most likely is reporting back to the KGB, they would have known about it anyway. That's the only reason that kind of shit would have happened. All right, so we're done with that. We're going to go into the intelligence section. Hold on one second. All right, again, I'm sorry. Part of the intelligence section we're doing is the constitutional rights that Oswald was denied. So this part is due process. It says the Supreme Court has interpreted the due process clause in the 5th and 6th, the 14th Amendment identically, as Justice Felix Frankfurter once explained in a concurring opinion. To suppose that due process of law meant one thing in the 5th Amendment and another in the 14th Amendment is too frivolous to require elaborate rejection. In 1855, the Supreme Court explained that to ascertain whether a person is due process, the first step is to examine the Constitution itself and to see whether this process be in conflict with any of its provisions. In the same 1855 case, the Supreme Court said the words due process of law were undoubtedly intended to convey the same meaning as the words by the law of the land in the Magna Carta. See, even in the Supreme Court in 1855, they're referring back 600 years to the Magna Carta. In 1884 case of Hurtado versus California, the court said due process of law in the 14th Amendment refers to the law of the land in each state, which derives its authority from the inherent and reserved power of the state, exerted within the limits of those fundamental principles of liberty and justice which lie at the base of our civil and political institutions, and the greatest security from which resides is the right of the people to make their own laws and to alter them at their pleasure. All right, hold on a second. All right, we're going over these terms here. It says liberty. The U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted the term liberty in the due process clauses broadly, although the court has not assumed to define liberty with any great precision. That term is not confined to mere freedom from bodily restraint. Liberty under law extends to the full range of conduct which the individual is free to pursue and cannot be restricted except for a proper government objective. So when they deprived Oswald of having a lawyer and of his life. They deprived him of his liberty, which is definitely against the due process there. All right, so this is one of the most important things here, procedural due process. Okay, procedural due process requires the government officials to follow fair procedures before depriving a person of life, liberty, or property. When the government seeks to deprive a person of some of those interests, procedural due process requires the government to afford the person a minimum notice, an opportunity to be heard, and a decision made by a neutral decision maker. Okay, so when you look at all those things, okay, Oswald was deprived of his liberty by not being allowed to have an attorney, not being allowed to face, his accusers, his witnesses, things like that. And then eventually he was deprived of his life. The three main things in due process. And another thing is that he wasn't allowed the opportunity to be heard or to question the government's witnesses. There was no neutral decision maker. The Warren Commission wasn't neutral. They were very, very one-sided in their means of just narrowing it down just to Oswald. They didn't look for any other, even though there was numerous statements of other people, they did not look at other instances of people that might have been involved. Okay, they completely ignored the shots from the grassy knoll. They completely ignored the connections between Oswald and Ruby and Tippit. They completely ignored other people that were spotted, by the grassy knoll and other places that might have been involved in the assassination. So they weren't a neutral decision maker. And therefore, if there wasn't a neutral decision maker, Oswald was deprived of his rights. Okay. This protection extends to all government proceedings that can result in an individual's deprivation, whether civil or criminal in nature, from parole violation hearings to administrative hearings regarding government benefits and entitlements to full-blown criminal trials. The article, some kind of hearing written by Judge Henry Friendly, created a list of basic due process rights that remains highly influential and has both content and relative priority. These rights, which are apply equally to civil due process and criminal due process, are. Okay. And we're going to go through each one of these, and I'm going to show you how Oswald was denied all of these rights. Okay. An unbiased tribunal. The Warren Commission was a very biased tribunal. Oswald wasn't allowed, even after death, to have someone representing him and questioning the witnesses that the tribunal, the Warren Commission, brought forward, objecting to the evidence brought forward. Again, this fucking, made up, created, fake piece of evidence that the Warren Commission tried to present to witnesses about, the paper bag. Let's see, a notice of the purpose, proposed action, and grounds asserted for it. Okay. Oswald never received, he wasn't even notified he was charged in some instances. Okay. He didn't have legal representation to go before the judge and allow him to, advise him to declare himself not guilty. Opportunity to present reasons why the proposed action should not be taken. He wasn't allowed to go before a 3-judge panel or a grand jury, okay, to have the case, or a judge to have the case dismissed on lack of evidence. Basically, Oswald's fingerprints weren't on the rifle. He wasn't allowed to see that evidence. An attorney wasn't allowed to see that evidence. An attorney wasn't allowed during this bias tribunal, okay, to question whether that evidence should be inserted into the Warren report. It wasn't even a fair trial, I guess you could say. The right to present evidence, including the right to call witnesses. Of course, Oswald was murdered. He didn't have a chance to present evidence or witnesses, to even question the Warren Commission's witnesses and object to their evidence. Okay? If Oswald had an attorney, okay, any attorney would have got Day up on the stand and said, hey, did you find Oswald's fingerprints on the rifle? And if they said yes, well, where are Oswald's fingerprints? Where are those cards? Oh, I don't have that information. It was sent to the FBI. If they said no, then case dismissed. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, jury. If he said the FBI, they would have brought the FBI in and questioned them. Did you find Oswald's prints on the rifle? No, we didn't, but we did find a palm print after he was dead, and we went in there and fingerprinted him after he was dead in the funeral home. Your Honor, I object to this this type of evidence being thrown in. Case dismissed. Thank you very much. Goodbye, juror. We'll put Day back up on the stand. Did you find gunpowder residue on Oswald's cheek as him firing a rifle? No, he didn't, but we did find positive paraffin test on Oswald's hands. Do they use paraffin tests in all court cases now as evidence? Well, no, they don't, because they sometimes produce false positives and false negatives. So the paraffin test is non-reliable, right? No, not exactly. What do you mean? Well, the paraffin test can sometimes produce false positives, but if it's a false negative, then it's most likely that is correct. So in that case, Oswald's hands could have a false positive, but it might not be that he fired a weapon, right? That's correct. And Oswald's cheek could show that he didn't have gunpowder residue on his cheek, and that would be a false negative, right? No, because if it shows that it's not, then it's not. It's only in the false positives. Okay. Your Honor, I ask this case be dismissed. Thank you very much, juror. Have a nice day. Boom. Okay. Oswald was never allowed for any of this information to be brought forward. Okay. Oswald wasn't allowed to question or cross-examine the witnesses. So, Victoria Adams, when you heard the shots, what did you do? Well, I immediately ran over to the, I looked out the window and I ran over to the stairs. We're going to come across and read her statements, okay, but I'm paraphrasing. I ran over to the stairs and went down the stairs from the 4th floor down to the 1st floor and went out to the front to see what had happened. Did you pass anyone in the stairwell in that time that it happened? No. Did you hear anyone's footsteps above you or below you? No. Okay. Carolyn Adams, did you see Oswald anywhere in the building? Yes, he was in the break room having a Coke at about 12:15 to 12:20 before the assassination. Okay. Officer Baker, did you see Oswald when you went into the building? Yes, I did. I saw him in the 2nd floor lunchroom. He was standing there, walking away from the door, and he had a Coke in his hand. What time was that? Well, it was after the shooting, approximately within 90 seconds after the shooting. How do you know it was 90 seconds? Because you guys in the Warren Commission had me walk the route several times, and it averaged out to about 90 seconds. Okay. So Oswald was spotted in the 2nd floor lunchroom drinking a Coke at 12:15, 12:20. He's also spotted at 12 o'clock by the phone downstairs on the 1st floor, just like he said. And then Officer Baker spots him 90 seconds, so at 12:31.5 in the lunchroom drinking a Coke, just like Carolyn Adams had saw him 10 minutes before. But no one saw the elevators go up. No one heard Oswald go up the stairs. No one saw Oswald with a package. No one saw Oswald with a rifle. These are all the things that Oswald was denied when he was assassinated. They knew this. Whoever killed him, they all knew that if Oswald had gotten a trial, he would have walked. And if Oswald had walked, then who committed the crime? These were rights that Oswald was denied. We'll keep going. A right to know opposing evidence. Oswald wasn't allowed for his attorney, because it's called voir dire, I believe is what it's called, where the prosecution takes before the court a list of all their evidence and copies of all their evidence and gives it to the court, and the court gives that to the defense attorney, and the defense attorney builds a defense against those witnesses and against that evidence. Okay? So not only does the prosecution question the witnesses before the trial, the defense gets to depose them before the trial and look at their depositions in front of the prosecution. And they get to question that and then talk to other people and bring their own witnesses and their own evidence to dispute that. Like I said, they're going to zero in. If Oswald had an attorney like Mark Lane, they would have zeroed in right on no fingerprints of Oswald on the rifle, no fingerprints of Oswald on the bag, no picture of the bag in the corner, no one seeing Oswald carry the bag upstairs to the 6th floor. Frazier saying and his sister saying the bag was 2 feet to 2 feet 3 inches long, and they carried it under his armpit, which is 24 inches. Now, I keep overemphasizing going over this because that is their case. They have no case. This is why you had to kill Oswald. Number 6, the right to cross-examine adverse witnesses. Now, when you've got people like Brennan saying, yeah, I saw Oswald in the window. Oh, really? Well, how come you never identified him at the lineup? But yet, it was your description that went out on the wire that got Oswald arrested. That's adverse witnesses. Another adverse witness would have been, what was her name? I can't remember her name right now. Helen Markin, who said she saw Oswald shoot Tippett, and then Oswald walked right up to her, and she closed her eyes. She put her hands in her face and closed her eyes, and then she lowered her hands, and Oswald looked right in his face, and she looked right in his face, and she got a chill, and then she left. And then when she comes into the ID witnessing of Oswald, okay, the one where Oswald steps forward and says, "Hi, my name's Lee Oswald. I work at the Texas School Book Depository." Okay. She couldn't identify him. The police had to guide her to Oswald to help him identify him. Okay? They had to ask her many, many times. These people were never put on the stand, never were cross-examined by Oswald's attorney. Another right he was denied. Number 7, a decision based exclusively on the evidence presented. None of the Warren Commission's conclusion was based on the most important evidence that he did it. It was just an overwhelming of, this, yes, that. But the most important evidence is that Oswald's fingerprints were never on the rifle. The paraffin test was negative. No one saw him bring the rifle up there and assemble it. And no one saw him shooting the president. Okay? In most cases, it would have been thrown out before even a trial. Okay? Because they have if Oswald had been given a chance to present this type of evidence before a 3-judge panel, they would have thrown it out for lack of evidence. Again, another reason why Oswald had to have been killed. Opportunity to be represented by counsel. Well, we all know Oswald wasn't represented by counsel, even though he kept demanding a lawyer. Even though Bookout and Frazier and Fritz and all these other cops said he only asked once and then he never asked again after that. Okay? Just because someone's stupid and they keep talking doesn't mean they're guilty. It doesn't mean that the police have a right to deny them of their rights. Requirement that a tribunal prepare a record of the evidence presented. Was there recording of Oswald's interrogations? No, there wasn't. Was there a written record of the Oswald interrogation? No, there wasn't. It was written after the fact. And then they were told that There were no notes taken. There was no recording taken. Number 10, requirement that the tribunal prepare written findings of fact and reasons for its decision. Now, you'll read through the Warren Commission volumes their conclusion, and Oswald did, and it's the same thing when you watch Dan Rather, and the same thing when you watch, Walter Cronkite sit up there and completely lie to the American people and say, Oswald brought the weapon into the schoolbook depository. Oswald was seen in the window firing the rifle. Oswald shot Tippit. All these things, and they have no evidence directly linking that. So, in conclusion, Oswald was denied his rights established by the Constitution and his due process of rights through these 10 statements here, okay, of fact. So, sorry, I do work and call people, and people are calling me right now. All right, so as you can see here, we're going to keep going down all this constitutional mumbo-jumbo, I guess you could say, stuff that I used to take for granted, but now, this is deadly serious. Anyway. All right. We'll continue tomorrow. All right. Bye-bye.